mic's muted. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. And what we normally do, if you've been to any of these before, we're going to try and keep to the same format, is if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. If you like that question, give it a thumbs up. The ones with the most thumbs up, we'll ask Kate at the end. If we don't get through them all, then I'll ask Kate anyway. We'll try and get them answered, and I'll send them afterwards. There is a little survey that my colleague Pauline will send out at the end. If you've got time, it's not compulsory or anything, but if you've got time, just give us your honest feedback, because we'll improve as much as we can on these. So as you know, we've got Kate here, who is the Senior Life Science Information Specialist. That's quite a mouthful at Mavericks. Is that how you say it, Kate? Yeah. So Kate's role involves designing and carrying out those literature searches for systematic reviews, which quite a lot of us do, and we're always striving to learn more, aren't we? She designs and carries out health technology assessments, pragmatic reviews, and economic models. She also provides that training, methodological support, easier said than done, and scope topics to inform proposals, budgets, and test viability of research questions. So got an awful lot of experience behind her. Been on some groups, so things like Inter-Task Technology Assessment Review, so TAR, and carried out single technology assessment appraisals, diagnostic assessment reports, and short reports for NICE and NIHR. She's a member of the Cochrane Information Retrieval Methods Group and the HTAI Information Retrieval Group. So lots and lots of really rich experience here from Kate, and I for one am really looking forward to listening what you've got to say. So I'm going to stop now, because otherwise we're going to run out of time, because I'm waffling, and I'm going to pass it over to Kate.
Okay, thanks, Louise. Now I'm going to try and share the screen. Let's see if that even works. Get onto. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, we can, yeah.
Please shout if you can't. Okay, thank you, Louise. I made that as hard as possible for you by putting in the worst words. So I think the title of this talk is quite hard to unpick what I'm actually going to talk about. So I've got a couple of subtitles for you. How information specialists and librarians can contribute to improving systematic review quality and minimise research waste, because that's the crux of it. Or as my colleague said, librarians saving research from the bin. So I'm going to be talking about some work that my co-authors and I did. We're all information specialists. We're librarians without a library. We basically spend all day, every day, searching for all of these projects as the main part of our job. So I'm going to be presenting some work we undertook when we all worked together at a research organisation called KSR Limited. We looked at some of the methodological errors and reporting failures in published systematic reviews. But it's not enough just to point out these errors and mistakes in methods. So I've got some suggestions on how we can implement changes and action to actually improve not only the work we do, but the work that ends up being published, because that's the point of it, really. So I'm afraid I've got some boring bits. Apologies, I think Pip was probably at this talk. This was previously presented at HLG in 2018. Which in turn was a write-up of a workshop I ran on this at the International Clinical Librarians Conference in 2017. My colleague, Shelley de Kock, has since updated this analysis, and it's been published in the reference below. So a little bit of information about our conflicts of interest. As Louise said, I work for a research consultancy. Previously, we all worked for KSR, which was another research consultancy. And I'm going to refer to lots of references, but don't feel you've got to scribble them down, because I've done a lovely, neat reference list in my end slides, which will be shared with you after the webinar. Okay, so my key themes, I'm going to talk about the importance of good quality reviews. It's a bit of buzzword bingo now. Everyone wants to do one. Every lecturer is trying to get students to do one single-handedly. Everyone wants in on the game. And it's essential that the searching for reviews is really good quality. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the guides and tools and reporting standards that are aimed towards improving systematic review quality, and look at some research into just how good reviews are. So firstly, how good Cochrane reviews are, and also to look at a sample we analysed within the KSR evidence database, and a selection of drug company submissions that were part of the NICE Single Technology Assessment Programme. Most importantly, I'm going to talk about opportunities and techniques that we as search specialists and also that researchers can make use of to improve systematic review searches and the quality of the entire systematic review, both how we conduct it and how we report it. Okay, so let's start off. Doug Altman, the founding director of the Centre for Medical Statistics in Oxford, he set up EquatorNet, which collates all the reporting standards. He was a champion of peer review to improve the quality of research. And Doug said, to maximise the benefit to society, you need not just to do research, but to do it well. Because if it's not great research, what is the point? There is no point. So don't take the systematic review label at face value and think, oh, it says it's a systematic review, it must be really, really good. To use my second-hand car analogy, which I use all the time, we want to kick the tyres and we want to lift the bonnet and see how it works underneath. So hopefully we all recognise these vital elements to a good systematic review search. The whole point of a review is to minimise bias and errors, and it starts with us, with the search. We want a clearly defined, answerable research question. If we're not sure what the review is on, or the researcher or the commissioner isn't quite sure what they want us to look at, we cannot go any further. Once we have our question, we might break it down with a question framework such as PICO or PICOS. That really doesn't matter. I'm not going to get into that. But a systematic review will use systematic and explicit predefined methods to identify relevant research. We want rigorous, robust searches that match the scope and are a fit for purpose. And when we start thinking about introduction of filters and limits, we really want to consider whether they're necessary and what the potential impact of those is. Where possible, we want to introduce peer review of our strategies right at the beginning, at the proposal or the protocol stage, because there's nothing worse than once the work's finished and it's been published, someone goes, oh, you spelt that wrong in line 57. What good is that to me? I can't do anything. And believe me, that has happened to me. We want to select an appropriate range of resources. Any review should include reference checking. That's not an optional extra, but we may also choose supplementary or inclusion of grey sources. And then at the end, when we've done all this really great hard work, we need to ensure our reporting is transparent and reproducible. So we use these predefined methods, we plan our methods, and they're often published in a protocol. So they might be as a Cochrane review protocol and CDSR, or on something like the Prospero database, Open Science Framework, or increasingly people are using institutional repositories. We need to really get it into our heads that the search is the foundation of the systematic review. If the search is flawed or biased in some way, the whole systematic review is compromised. And it doesn't matter what fancy network meta-analysis is done later on in the review, if the search is weak, the review will be flawed. Okay, back to Doug. And I'm sure we've all felt this at multiple points in our career. Like so many things, the principles are indeed simple, but the realization that practice is not so simple arrives gradually. And that's that horrible feeling when you think, oh, that didn't work the way I've always thought it worked. We've all had it. And this is true about life. We learn how to do things correctly often by doing them wrong in the first place. So for me, it's preferable to learn more quickly and therefore less painfully by learning from someone else's mistakes. So searching, as I said, is the foundation of the systematic review. Identification of evidence is crucial to avoid bias. All the steps of the review are carried out by the whole team, or at least in tandem. So for instance, screening and data extraction are done by a minimum of 2 reviewers, but searching isn't. Often it's one little searcher. And although we're fantastic, we are human and we can make mistakes too. So it's not really fair that all the responsibility of the review rests on a single searcher. And that's why I'm really passionate about peer review of search strategies at this point, before anyone looks at any results. We want to minimise bias, but poor searches and errors will increase the risk of bias. And there are still lots of problems, not only in the quality of the way that reviews are conducted, but also in the way that they're reported. So there's an awful lot of evidence. We can't ignore it, so we need to shout about it, about the role of the information professional in published systematic reviews. But we still see problems with this quality and reporting of review searches. So between 6 and 55% of reviews, only those actually have a librarian involved. Only 19% of article search methods are written by a librarian. And by goodness, you can see the ones that aren't. And I've got some examples of that later. Koffel found that 36% of systematic reviews gave no authorship or acknowledgement to the librarian involved in the work. So I can only think that those searches just appeared under a gooseberry bush overnight. Fagian in 2018 assessed 530 systematic reviews in dentistry, 22 of which were Cochrane reviews. And he assessed the reporting of the search and the screening process, which is something I'm going to be talking about throughout this talk. Out of his 530 reviews, how many do you think did a good job? Yes, you're right. None met all 12 criteria for complete reporting. Those that scored more highly, so they were better reported, although given Fagian's findings, I think we should say those that didn't score as badly as the rest. So the higher scoring ones were more likely to be published in journals with a higher impact factor, to be cited more often, and to include a meta-analysis. Now, when we undertake any research, it's the researcher's dream to be published in a journal with a high impact factor and to be cited lots. And the answer's clear. It's us they need. They need to involve us in the conduct and the reporting of the systematic review. So lots of guides available, both for the conduct and the reporting of systematic reviews, and several tools looking at assessment of bias. So there's really well-established guidance both on conduct and reporting, and it's a really important distinction. But nothing makes me groan more than reading a review and seeing we conducted this review following the PRISMA guidance, because that's clearly wrong. PRISMA is a reporting guide. So we've got the CRD report. It's an oldie but a goodie, and there's still an awful lot of excellent advice in there. The Cochrane handbook has just been updated. Cochrane Messier, which is the methodological expectations of Cochrane interventional reviews. This is really aspirational. There's been a mixed uptake, but that's also been updated recently, and let's hope that grows in traction. PRISMA, which hopefully everyone's familiar with, this is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. Now, the big journals state they require adherence to this for all manuscripts that are submitted for consideration for publication. However, it can be really hit and miss, and even in the big 5 journals, you will still find published systematic reviews in the last 5 years that do not meet PRISMA. So there's clearly something going a bit wrong with editors and peer reviewers that go, yes, that's excellent, publish it, and yet it fails to meet PRISMA, which is kind of the benchmark they hold for systematic reviews. So one of the PRISMA requirements is that authors should identify their study as a systematic review, meta-analysis, or both in the title. And when we undertook some research, we found 10% of studies claiming to follow PRISMA in their methods didn't have systematic review or meta-analysis in the title. Another PRISMA requirement is to present a full electronic search strategy for at least one database, including any limits used, such that it could be repeated. So this means it has to be transparent and reproducible. So if I pick up a publication of that review, I want to be able to take it away, replicate it exactly, and be able to, for instance, run an update, picking up from their dates. We've got PRISMA S now, which has been long awaited and is a really important extension that specifically focuses on how systematic review searches should be reported. Now, given that PRISMA has been around for quite some time and compliance is mixed at best, poor at worst, I think it will be some time before we start seeing PRISMA S not only adhered to, but held up as important. But the best we can do is try and adhere to that ourselves. We've got AmStar, which is a measurement tool for assessing systematic reviews, and it looks at how well the review's been conducted, and this has recently been revised and updated. And then two tools at the end, which I'll be talking about in more detail. The PRESS, which is the peer review of electronic search strategies, evidence-based checklist, bit of a mouthful, which is specifically aimed at assessing systematic review, well, any search strategy, to look for errors and flaws. And this isn't Big Brother checking your homework to point out your mistakes and show you up in front of everyone. This is an amazing tool, and I always say to my researchers, nothing would make me happier than receiving a printout of my search strategy back, covered in red pen. Of course, none of them use pen and paper now because they're young, but the point of it is, this is the point. I want input, I want suggested additional terms, I want someone to spot the mistakes that I'm blind to because I've been so deep writing the strategy. This is the point that we can mop up any of those things to improve the strategy, strengthen it, and therefore strengthen the quality of the systematic review. So peer review must happen either in the proposal stage, ideally, because if you get an and an or wrong, the project is either going to be impossible or cost you a lot more to conduct, but definitely at the protocol stage prior to any screening being undertaken. And then the ROBIS tool. So this is the risk of bias in systematic reviews. I'm going to talk about them in more detail, tell you what researchers found when they applied these to published reviews to assess how well the searching had been conducted. So first of all, a little bit of context.
Oh, Kate, I think your volume's gone a little. It may be me. I don't know if anyone else is having problems. Yeah, I think a few of us are having problems that your audio was lost. We've lost your audio.
Maybe I can do it through my laptop. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, yes.
Okay, sorry, which slide was it? You lost me. Do you want me to go back one?
No, just on this one. It was immediately.
Oh, okay. So two studies looked at Cochrane reviews, and they weren't singling Cochrane out for criticism because that would be unfair. Cochrane reviews are really convenient to find. You can select an adequate sample because there's so many of them, and they should always be conducted and reported in a standardized way. So you know you're going to hopefully get enough information to assess them. So firstly, Sampson in 2006 looked for straight errors. She looked for typos and mistakes, whereas Franco in 2018, he did a broader assessment and he used this euphemism problems instead. So there was some improvement between 2006 and 2018, but 50% of Cochrane reviews still had consequential problems, and they're the ones we're worried about. So inconsequential errors are perhaps something like, say, exploding a term when there's no narrower terms. It's not right, but it has no impact on the numbers retrieved. Consequential errors are a problem because they will reduce sensitivity and precision and result in potentially you missing important, well, potentially relevant records. Okay, so they found lots of similarities in the mistakes and problems that they found. So that often mesh was misused, perhaps it was used in wrong databases, or it wasn't exploded, or it was exploded unnecessarily, there were no narrower terms, or every single mesh term was exploded even when they didn't want to, so the results went sky high. And this is like a rookie error that has a big impact, and I'll talk about that when we look at single technology assessment submissions. They found either misspelling or failure to incorporate lots of different synonyms and word variants and acronyms. Samson found mishaps with Boolean. Fortunately, Franco didn't flag that up. And another thing that Samson found was real difficulties in cross-database translation. So it was not uncommon that one strategy was used on every single database without tailoring it to the syntax of the database, the code, perhaps the indexing or the field tags of the database. So that's just a nightmare that hopefully none of us do. Franco also found lots of really inadequate limits applied unnecessarily. But Franco was quite upbeat. He said 27% were error-free, hooray! But you know, out of those Cochrane reviews, only 84% of Franco's sample actually presented a Medline strategy that he could assess. So that's not great. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about some research that we undertook, myself and my co-authors, whilst working at KSR. So first of all, we used the ROBIS tool, Risk of Bias in Systematic Reviews, that was developed by Penny Whiting while she worked alongside us at KSR. This assessment is based on what is reported. So it won't give you like an aggregated score or a percentage, and it's not a tick list. You actually need to use your judgment and your expertise to assess the risk of bias. So it's not going there, that's wrong. It's saying, I'm unhappy with some of the things they did because it introduces the risk of bias, because ultimately at the point of planning, bias is theoretical. We're trying to minimize bias. We won't actually know if it's introduced bias until the end of the review. So ROBIS asked the key question on all the methods, what did they do in this review? But sometimes you can only base your answer based on what they said they did in that review, because if they don't tell you, you can't give them credit for it. Can we replicate their review and their search based on what they've reported? Have they told us enough? If not, it's poorly reported. And this, once you assess a few reviews using the ROBIS tool, it's brilliant to reflect back on your own practice. You know you've done all these things and you've documented them, and you want to show everyone your search record because it's so nice and organized. But if it doesn't make it into the final publication, then people critiquing your review might assess it as risk of bias. If they can't read it, you may well have not done it. So the ROBIS tool has 4 domains. We specifically looked at domain 2, which looks at the identification and selection of studies, and that helps us judge how well the systematic review was conducted. So as information specialists, we wanted to examine how, where, and why systematic review searching goes wrong. We selected a sample of systematic reviews, that were in the KSR evidence database. We analysed the reviews that had been rated at high risk of bias in domain 2, so the searching domain, they were judged to be at high risk of bias, as well as the whole review being assessed as high risk of bias, to see if we could match up when things start going wrong. And we included all our included records had been appraised by information specialists using ROBIS and independently checked by a second reviewer. And this gave us, at the time of analysis, an analysis set of 312 systematic reviews that were not just Cochrane reviews. We wanted to see how how reviews in general were conducted. So we analysed them using ROBIS Domain 2 plus the Press EBC checklist. In Domain 2, it looks at what databases are searched, what other methods were used to identify literature, such as hand searching, reference checking, grey literature. It looks at the strategy, although for many of them, the question was, is there a strategy, or is this a strategy? And if there was an actual strategy, then we applied the Press EBC here. And we also looked at the appropriateness of the limits, whether they were likely to introduce bias. So what did we find? Well, unfortunately, we found not all reviews and searches were of good quality. Often a flawed search resulted in a flawed systematic review. Of all the systematic reviews that were rated at high risk of bias, 81%, that's a lot, also failed on Domain 2, the searching domain. And this confirms the vital role searching has as the foundation, the bedrock of the systematic review. Poor reporting was prominent. 57% of those at high risk of bias failed to report dates or even which database they searched. There seems to be this ongoing confusion between what's a database and what's a host and what's an interface. So you see things such as, yes, we all know it. We see things such as we search PubMed, Medline, Ovid SP and EBSCO. So that's crystal clear, no idea. 50% of the reviews that we looked at limited to English language only, and this introduces potential language bias. So one KSR review I worked on of kidney disease had 13 out of 340 included studies were non-English, and they included Chinese, Persian, Spanish, German and French. And I know there's some of you sitting there going, we don't have translation facilities for all those languages. No, we don't either. But if you limit the search, you've never seen those records. You've lost that evidence before you've seen it. If you don't limit the search by language, you find them, they're picked up in screening, perhaps as potentially relevant. Then you perhaps don't have translation facilities available, but you can mark them in your Prisma flowchart as found, and you can put them in your appendices as unable to translate. And that means the next Persian reader who speaks Spanish, German, French and Chinese who wants to update your review can come along, go, oh yeah, that's really interesting. Oh, I can translate these. And then when they come to update the review, they know you found them and they can include them in their analysis. So my suggestion, my recommendation is not to limit by language. And if you hit the stumbling block where there's non-English content that you just don't have the facilities or the resources to translate, make them visible, put them in your Prisma as such, put them in your appendices. That's all you have to do. It's not very onerous. And straight away, you've just minimized language bias and your review is of better quality. So other things that we saw, lots of inappropriate limits, restricting a search to peer-reviewed journals only, saying, oh, I only want full text, excluding conference abstracts or unpublished literature, and weird age filters. Age filters are incredibly tricky to get right, so I try to avoid them because they bring a lot of problems. 75% of systematic reviews on KSR evidence managed to get systematic review or meta-analysis in the title, so at least they managed that Prisma hurdle to get over. And we found 0.35 were very, very special. They were systemic reviews. So let's look at some of the common flaws, and I really feel this kind of echoes the work that's been done by Sampson and Franco. So 30% of the strategies that we were able to assess had no thesaurus terms whatsoever. 36%, which is just terrifying, had one strategy untranslated for all resources. So they just banged in the same search terms. They didn't translate it for syntax, field tags, indexing, anything. 41% were lacking synonyms. 13% hadn't accounted for UK-US spelling variants, and 41% had failed to account for singular pluralization or alternative word forms. And these are all really easy things that we can fix. We have the expertise and skill to ensure that this doesn't happen in our searches. So you have to ask, how have they gone so wrong? So here's a more detailed representation of what we found. We can see 51 reviews claimed to be Prisma compliant, but 240 didn't even report a search strategy. So how have they been published? That's 77% we found had failed Prisma by failing to include a search strategy. And in that study by Koffel, they also found 77% with no strategy. Now, Franco was much better. He found 84% of his Cochrane reviews have a full Medline strategy, but you should expect that. In fact, you should expect 100% have a full search strategy. But we found all sorts of really weird and crazy things. You can see from the blue box, gosh, they struggle. Is it a suite of databases? Is it a host? Is it a portal? No idea, all gobbled up. That the abstract sometimes listed searching different resources to the actual methods in the paper. How does that happen? No search date reported, and then lots of inappropriate limits were found that are just unnecessary. And I have a few suggestions why these bizarre limits creep in. And then we found 50 only searched one database. There's nothing systematic about only searching one database. We found 57% were poorly reported and 53% had inappropriate limits. So I find that really bleak, that this is the quality of work that has been published. So let's have some light relief. Here's a selection of anonymized snippets for your entertainment of just how bad search methods that have been published are. We conducted a systematic search to tell all the studies relevant that contrasted outcomes of drug acts. PubMed and Embase databases were retrieved with no date restriction. So I assume that review is still ongoing, as they've still got, millions upon millions to get through. We interrogated studies from PubMed, OvidSP, EBSCO, and Science Direct. So again, confusing. Is it a database? Is it host? If they just interrogated them, I've got no chance of reproducing what they did. An integrative review was undertaken in PubMed, CINAHL and Embase for articles written between 1995 and 2012. This is looking good. And archived under relevant keywords written in English, but they didn't report what those keywords are. So it's so close to getting there, and yet it still fails. And then the very worst of the bunch, the literature review was overdone using the following terms. Now, some of these may be a consequence of, for instance, the authors not speaking English at their first language, but you can see that there's enough muddying of what was done that it's clear the searcher has not written this gobbledygook. So how can we make sure these never happen on projects that we worked on? So another analysis that we undertook, was looking at common inadequacies in single technology assessments. So KSR is an evidence review group and works for NICE. NICE's STA process requires drug companies to prepare a full systematic review themselves and an economic model for each new drug that's assessed. And this forms a submission, which is then submitted to NICE and critiqued by teams of independent experts. And my co-authors and I worked as one of those expert centres. So we looked back at a sample of the STAs that we'd appraised for NICE between 2010 and 2016. And at the risk of being repetitive, the same problems keep coming up. So databases, either an inappropriate range or they selected really strange resources, strategy construction. We frequently found too many facets, and they included things such as an outcomes facet, which is not always appropriate to include and very rarely appropriate to include. We found multi-file searches with incorrect indexing. So they ran simultaneous searches across multiple databases, but perhaps they only included mesh while searching Embase. Or the filters they used on multiple databases, they only used, say, an RCT filter for Medline with no effort to translate that to the other database they were searching. Adverse event searches were just dreadful. We often saw the application of RCT filters, and Cochrane recommended practice and work by Sue Golder is very, very clear that you don't search in that way. You identify the adverse events of interest for that intervention or for that condition. Content-wise, strategies often lack synonyms and truncation. They usually lack trade names, and there was a missed opportunity to include CADTH registry numbers. Subject indexing was just a car crash. A lot of indexing misuse, and this is, I think, why we saw strategies with too many facets. So when I say misuse, they did things such as automatically exploding every single indexing term. So some of those indexing terms, yes, they wanted to explode. Some of those indexing terms did not have narrower terms. So although it's a mistake, it didn't have a consequence on the search number. It still picked up the same number of records. But because they exploded every single indexing term, they also exploded many, many indexing terms that had loads of narrower terms that were not relevant to their topic, that they did not want. And this means if they explode everything, the results they get are going to be massive. So they do that at the start of the strategy, and they put in their PICO, and then they get to the end and they go, oh, damn, the results are huge. So then they start whacking on all sorts of weird limits or another facet or an outcomes facet, or they're trying to be far too specific in their limits. And this is kind of a snowball consequence from just not understanding how exploding indexing works right at the beginning. Their strategy had picked up so much momentum that they were trying to slap solutions on the end of the strategy, whereas really they should have stopped and gone back and looked at the line numbers and thought, at which point does it start going wrong? And I think this is a big indicator that some searchers or some of the searchers that then contribute towards these submissions do not understand what indexing and explosion does. Other indexing misuse, stuff like putting mesh into Embase, unwarranted explosion, and dependence on subheadings. Now, anyone that's searched for quite some time knows that indexing is a great idea. Subheadings are a great idea. Wouldn't it be great if we could just search for the indexing term for breast cancer with the subheading of economics, and that's our whole strategy, because surely everything that's relevant will be indexed in that way. But unfortunately, just as indexing can be inconsistent or not specific enough, subheadings are worse. So it's very rare I include them. I have to have a really good reason for including an indexing subheading, because it just doesn't work very effectively. Limits were overly restrictive, which is again because I think they're exploding, all their indexing had gone wrong. There were loads of language limits. There were restrictions by country, which often doesn't work very well. And crimes against study design filters. So something we saw really commonly in these STA submissions was putting something like an RCT filter on Central, which is just a database of trials. So you don't need to filter it, it's ready filtered. So we saw putting an economics filter into NHSE for the same reason, or not understanding why they were searching databases. So putting an RCT filter on CDSR, just really pointless. The least heinous of their crimes was not referencing their filters. A filter is someone else's work, so it's good practice to always cite your source at the bottom. And we know all of these mistakes and flaws, we want to avoid them in our practice. So I have some top tips. So when conducting reviews, whether you're commissioning the systematic review, whether you're undertaking them yourself, whether you're advising someone who's undertaking them, These are the top tips for rigorous and robust systematic review searches. Firstly, the structure. You want to pull out the key concepts from the research question. You don't need to search for tall, blonde, left-handed stamp collectors aged 33 3/4 with end-stage liver failure. There's no need to be that specific. For the facets, you don't need to include the whole PCOS, and it may not be appropriate or desirable to include an outcomes facet. And as I said, in STA submissions, the more facets that were included, it was like trying to slap a plaster on to fix an earlier error with indexing. If you're conducting multi-file searching, I really recommend caution, because they can quickly get out of hand without it being immediately apparent why. So when using combined strategies to multi-file search several databases at the same time, you need to combine mesh and mtree, you need to think about differences in field tags between the databases, and you need to be extremely careful when using database-specific filters. So don't put a Medline RCT filter on without any edits if you're searching, pardon me, for instance, Medline and Embase simultaneously. With adverse event searches, many systematic reviews just use clinical queries, but we know best practice, Cochrane and Sugolda, advice is not to use an RCT filter, but to tailor your adverse events of interest specifically for your condition or intervention. And content sensitivity. And I think this is where our skills become most powerful. So the point of a strategy is to build a really rich picture describing all our concepts fully with lots of synonyms, lots of word variants, truncation, drug names, CAS registry numbers, acronyms. And at this point, this is where I would press check, because two heads are better than one. Subject indexing, think about explosion, don't just use the default setting. Use database-specific indexing, mesh in Medline, mtree in Embase, and translate your strategy between resources. Be really careful if you're using restricted focus or starring. Limits are a trade-off between sensitivity and specificity, so between finding everything plus rubbish compared to less rubbish, but you might miss some hits. Justify your limits and be really careful of bias. Study design filters. The best search probably won't include a study design filter, because the minute you apply one, you're restricting it. So it's not essential to apply a filter for a good search. Don't use them on ready filtered sources such as Central and CDSR. Including a filter won't fix a poor search, but incorrect use of a filter can undermine an okay search. And always reference your filter. And press check at the proposal and protocol stage. Press check your strategy, your colleagues, offer it as a consultation service, get together on email and have a little pool that will offer to press check each other's strategies, volunteer to peer review protocols with Press and ROBIS so that you can head off any potential problems and therefore improve the quality of the whole systematic review. And reporting. Similar recommendations for reporting. The most important thing is you. The searcher should report their own searches. Many of the problems we see are from somebody else having a hand in the methods. Of course, good reporting is dependent on good record keeping and it ensures accuracy, but what we often see is a garbled method. And this, I think, is when a full report gets cut down to meet a journal word limit, and I call it the word count cull. Do a sense check. If it's garbled nonsense, you need to intervene. And this has implications for authorship, and you also need to review the final version. Dates, put the date range you search, the date of your search. We all know the difference between PubMed and Ovid, but this can be a really easy target for the word count cull if you're not the one trimming the article down. The reader should not have to guess where you searched based on your strategy syntax. And the strategy, it should be the real thing. We don't want a list of terms. We don't want a jazzy box of words called keywords. Don't tidy it up. Don't put it in a table. We want line numbers, hits per line, terms exactly as they were run. Multi-file searches I've talked about. If you did this, tell me. I don't want to have to guess from the strategy what you did. If you searched all of the Cochrane library, but you only exported central results, tell me that. And limits, just state your justification. If drug X was only licensed after 2013, that's fine, just tell me. And the title, put systematic review in the title so that it meets PRISMA. You'll be glad to know my conclusions. Well, a poor or a flawed search will result in a flawed systematic review, because a good search is the foundation of a good systematic review. Reviews that are at high risk of bias in domain 2, it's often for really easily avoided reasons. And this is where we can help, because some of the bloopers are from non-searchers getting involved. The information specialist and librarian being involved increases the robustness, not just of the search, but the whole systematic review. Improving both the searching and the reporting improves the rigour and increases the value of research undertaken. And all the common flaws and failures in searching undermine the value of systematic reviews, and they contribute to unnecessary research waste. Right, thank you. Thank you very much for sitting through that.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you. Lots of really positive comments coming through. You've got some nice claps. I agree. Show your appreciation, guys. That was really informative. Thank you. As I say, lots and lots of discussions, and I was trying to keep up with it as we were going along. One of the questions that got most, or one of the comments, in fact, Helen has got a hand up. So if Helen wants to come on mic, quite happy for you to do so.
Oh, thanks very much, Louise.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, Kate. Oh, excellent presentation. Thanks very much for that. A couple of things I wanted to explore, and they might be covered in some of the questions in the chat, but there was mention about journals and peer reviewing, and I just wanted to make mention about the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and there's probably similar other committees, you know, and they are signed up in their recommendation about the reporting standards. So I would just like to say to everybody out there, you know, that librarians and information specialists have put themselves forward for being involved in peer reviewing of journal publications, you know, volunteer for that, because I feel maybe as a community we're not, you know, really involved in that as much as we should be, and I think that would really help push forward some of these improvements. So that's just a comment about peer reviewing on a wider scale. And then just I wanted to pick up about language bias. I thought that was a really interesting way about putting those other languages in the appendix. But I just wanted to pick get your thoughts on grey literature searching, you know, and the difficulties with grey literature searching in non-English language areas, really, because, you know, that is difficult. We can rely on
sorry, Helen, you're
Translate.
breaking up a little bit.
Oh, okay. It was just about grey
Sorry,
literature.
you broke up a bit. I didn't get your question.
I'll try again, but if not, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
So grey literature and searching for non-English grey literature and any issues we should consider.
Lots. I mean, the best searcher will be multilingual, a surgeon, I don't know, a public health specialist, a virologist, but quite frankly, they couldn't afford us if we had those skills. So for my shame, I only speak English, but I do, I'm aware of that bias as an English searcher, but I make efforts to search outside of English. So depending on the scope, it might be appropriate to include non-English databases. Maybe using Google Translate. If, for instance, you search lilacs, which is Latin American, you can use the Dex Thesaurus, which translates mesh in English to Dex in Portuguese and Spanish. So you can use that to mine appropriate language. On a review of Japanese encephalitis, we identified the non-English language databases we want to search, that many were Chinese, etc. And we actually outsourced that to native language speakers because we knew we shouldn't even go there ourselves. So I think the important thing is your systematic review methods, you put it all on the table, you say, this is what I did, and you invite people to pick it over. If we couldn't search international databases, it's there, it's clear. If we made an attempt, all the strategies are in the appendices. So the best thing would be a partnership, but that's not always possible to partner with native speaking searchers who can access those databases.
I'm just going to add there, Helen, just a shameless, what's it called? Promotion
Plug.
here. Plug. That was the word I was looking for. I said promotion in the end, but shameless plug. In March, we've got decolonising Braille literature as one of these sessions. I know my colleague John, who is on the call, is presenting on that one, and I know he's done quite a lot of work on it. It's coming up. It's coming up. It's here.
Here he is.
He can tell you a little bit more about it and about how he's going to discuss and highlight how we are doing it at Lancaster if you wanted to be part of that. But spaces are limited, I'm not going to lie. If you've not already booked on, book on.
I'm booked. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
So that's a shameless plug on our behalf. Some of the numbers that you said, Kate, were actually alarming. I realised actually at one point my mic was on and I was going, oh,
I can hear you.
I was like, what? You know, and then I realised that I turned it off because I thought, oh goodness me, it really was
it's
alarming.
Horrific, isn't it? It makes you think some of these authors have no business working in systematic reviews, you know.
Yeah. In the chat, some people are saying how they're you know, they may be the only worker in that place, or a lot of it is language based. Some lecturers are saying, you know, they're doing a systematic review, but actually they're doing a literature review, or they feel they've not got quite enough knowledge and experience to deal with this. What would you recommend in those kind of situations? Where can people get that extra knowledge, that extra expertise? How do you work around that?
Yeah, so for instance, for peer reviewing, there is a press forum that only librarians can join, and you could post your strategy and ask for input. I'm only seeing a few comments, but Pip, absolutely, searching is an art, not a science. So you can either post your work and then peer review someone else's. I think personally you learn so much from seeing other people searching, and some people are a bit close, keeping it close to their chest. Oh no, they're going to see I'm rubbish. Oh no, but it's not. I make so many mistakes. Please tell me before it's been published. If you're not confident with searching, have a look at all the documentation behind the Press EBC, because when I trained up some search trainees, it was early days when that was introduced, probably 2010-11, and we used that, and they said that was like a Bible. It explained what each thing was, how indexing explosion worked, and they actually used that as a tool as they learned searching. So there are ways such as that, but reach out to discussion lists, reach out to searchers that you know, send emails, strike up email acquaintances. We really have to use our network as best we can.
I agree with that. Talking, and I think said right at the beginning about mistakes. Actually, yeah, we do learn from our mistakes, and we learn from other people's mistakes, don't we? Someone, sorry, because the chat went quite quickly, but someone had said, I'd like to see the perfect search. I mean, John and I, you saw a very glimpse of. We share searches, and we're like, have you seen the state of this?
I know. I look back on stuff. I mean, my rule is always look forward. You look back on stuff and you think, oh, what was I thinking? We were really lucky at KSR because we were a big team of 6 expert searchers, and we shared stuff, and we each had our foibles that we misspelled. Mine is always all Pip, always. I think my fingers just get it wrong. My colleague would make all sorts of bloopers that were hilarious and slightly rude, but 2 heads are better than 1. So actually a strategy, if your review team aren't commenting on it, then they don't meet the authorship requirements of IJCME. So I'm going to assume they're commenting on your strategy and making suggestions. I
suppose not everyone works in a review team, do they? I think that's quite a bit of a problem.
Hard because I think there's still this view that librarians are like, I don't know, semi-admin. It's something I've hit against my entire career. Oh, you know, we just fiddle about with papers or something. And actually, it takes decades and decades of experience and you never stop learning. I never stop learning. The search I do today that I'm happy with, I will not be happy with next week. So I don't know if there is a perfect search. Peer review is very much a tool to improve what we have.
There was a comment, and it was quite far up now, so please forgive me if I get this wrong, about journal editors. Just let me see if I can find it. I think it was about the training of journal editors, really. You know, if they're being published below par, then is there a training need? Do editors have to?
There's a massive training need. I think the worst I ever found, I'm going to try and wrap my brains, it was by Cipriani, and I think it was on antidepressants, and it was that paper that was on BBC News, probably Newsround, it was everywhere. And two of the authors were John Geddes and John Ioannidis, who are massive names within systematic reviewing, and it didn't have a search strategy. So I contacted Cipriani, the lead author. He knew nothing about nothing. I went back to Prospero and found the searcher who wasn't an author, and she'd left her job, and so she didn't have the records. So if it's published, I think it was the Lancet, you know, if it was in the Lancet with John Geddes and John Ioannidis, and it didn't meet Prisma, what's going on?
And do you think that perhaps it needs, it was another suggestion in the chat, this is not off my head, that, you know, librarians should be part of that peer reviewing those publications? I know you said about press earlier, but
yeah, absolutely.
Do you think...
Absolutely. I'm a peer reviewer for Cochrane DTA, Diagnostic Test Accuracy Group, so I peer review protocols, and it's a way that we can feed in. Peer reviewing a manuscript is like shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. We can point out the mistakes, but we can't fix them. So ideally, we're actually involved in improving the quality of the research just before and as it's being conducted, because they're not cheap and they take a lot of time, and what a waste if they're rubbish. So I do think involvement in peer review is essential, but ideally, we need to start being seen as part of the team. And I don't have a quick fix, because that's something that is still ongoing. It's something I've faced in every job I've worked in.
Yeah, I think a lot of us face it, don't they? We're either so overrun, and then we're not being asked where, you know, where that research is. Or anyway, we're right on time. We're right up to time. I'd like to say thank you very much to Kate and to all you guys for attending and being fabulous in the chat and really engaging with it. I'm really pleased with that. I'm going to try and get the recording out to you as soon as I possibly can. If anyone's got any questions, then please do email me. You know, I can liaise with Kate on those. But thank you very much, and I hope to see everyone soon. And thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'll probably get the questions to answer, but failing that, if you've got a question, please just email me, because I love talking about searching. I could do it all day long.
I know. I think yeah, I think we all could. But thank you.